in my opinion, this is the wrong strategy. Not just because the Iranian threat is a much more dire threat than whatever Israel or the United States or anyone else could face from the Palestinians. The Palestinian problem, in my opinion, is one that has been, despite some flare-ups, intifadas, etc., something that has been managed by Israel over the years. But that is not even really the point of why I'm here today, and it's not the point of why I wrote my book. The point is that right now, the state of Palestinian politics, the state of affairs amidst the Palestinians, is such that if Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, fell on his head last night, or smoked crack, or something that would alter his line of thinking permanently, and let's say he decided, and believe me, what I'm about to tell you, Bibi Netanyahu would never consent to, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, that if Bibi Netanyahu decided that he wanted to give up the entire West Bank, he wanted to uproot every settlement, he wanted to pull up every checkpoint, he wanted to tear down the barrier that surrounds the West Bank, tear down the barrier that surrounds the Gaza Strip, essentially ease the sanctions around the Gaza Strip, provide the Palestinians with every Muslim holy site that they have been asking for in Jerusalem, and then on top of that allow for 100,000 Palestinians claiming to be refugees from the 1948, 1967, or other wars. Allow all of that to happen. In other words, give the Palestinians everything that they have been asking for the last 60 plus years. If Netanyahu were to do that tomorrow, and believe me, for any of you who are devout Zionists, that is not going to happen. You can take your blood pressure medicine or whatever. It's not going to happen. This is not the Prime Minister who's going to do it. But let's just say, for argument, that he would do this, there would be nobody on the Palestinian side to ratify that agreement. Why? Because the Palestinians are in the midst of a brutal civil war. This is not a civil war that is being splashed on the front pages of the New York Times or the Washington Post. You are not going to watch it unfold on either Fox News or MSNBC, and you're certainly not going to hear about it on NPR, otherwise known in Washington as National Palestine Radio. You're not going to see it anywhere because, for whatever reason, this has not been a highly publicized war. The ivory tower, the professorate does not deal with it, and I would actually argue that this is primarily because the Palestinians don't want most people to know about this war. But the fact remains is that in 2006 there was an election that was held, perhaps the freest and fairest election ever held in the Middle East. Hamas won by a large margin. Fatah, the long-standing authority, the controlling party of the Palestinian Authority, refused to relinquish power to Hamas, refused to work out an agreement whereby the two sides would share power. And over the course of a year and a half, a stalemate ensued, which culminated in a war. We call it now the Second Six-Day War. Over the course of 6 days, Gaza was essentially sacked. It was overthrown in a military-style coup, which Hamas took to throwing Fatah members off of tall buildings to their death, shot people point blank in the legs and arms to ensure permanent disability. And this war, ladies and gentlemen, continues today. The West Bank is now under the full control of the Fatah faction. We can call it West Bankistan or Fatah land, but it is not controlled by any means by any member of Hamas. And on the other side, in the Gaza Strip, we call it Hamasistan or Gazastan. It is completely controlled by Hamas, and Fatah has no power there. The two little mini-states are literally at war with one another. If you are a member of an opposing faction in one of those states, you can be pulled off the streets. You could be killed. You could be tortured. You can come back to your family with your head shaved or mustache shaved. I don't know why, but this is something that happens a lot, where people are yanked off the streets, and there's been reports of this. But the fact remains is that there is a war that has been waged in both territories, and we are now seeing the emergence of two little mini-states run by two non-governments, by a non-people. And what we are being asked to do here in the United States is to support a policy whereby Israel is supposed to be working with the Palestinians. When, as I think I've just explained it, if you really want to dig, and you can look at it in here, I've written about it extensively, it's 250 pages, explaining this war that nobody quite understands. But when we talk to the White House, when we talk to Foggy Bottom at the State Department, when we talk to our congressmen, they still insist that there is a Palestinian, one Palestinian entity, while this war continues. And the fact remains that this war has been a brutal one that, unbeknownst to most people, has actually been going on for 20-something years. Very briefly, I wrote about this at length, but very briefly, this conflict emerges in 1987. 1987 was, of course, the year that the Intifada broke out, the first Intifada. The story begins where there is a flatbed truck filled with Palestinians returning home from working inside Israel. It's rear-ended by an Israeli convoy. A few people died who were in the back seat of that truck. The burial ceremonies turned into demonstrations. The demonstrations spread from the Gaza Strip to the West Bank. All of a sudden, there is this popular uprising that is taking place against Israel. At the time, the only faction that was out there was the Fatah faction. Fatah, of course, is the controlling faction of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the group that was run by that handsome devil we all know as Yasser Arafat. This is the man who used to wear the fatigues and the black and white checkered keffiyeh draped over his shoulder with the holster at his side. He called himself Mr. Palestine. Only when this war broke out, where was Mr. Palestine? Mr. Palestine was in Tunisia. He had been ousted by a guy named Ariel Sharon during the Lebanon War, and he was stuck in Tunisia while this uprising began. And he very much wanted to take control of this uprising, but he couldn't do it. What he had was his lieutenants dropping leaflets and giving direction to this uprising, but it was never really Arafat's. And by early 1988, a new faction emerges. That faction was a spin-off, a breakaway faction of the Muslim Brotherhood known as Hamas. Hamas also wanted to harness this uprising, but they were a more religious organization. They talked about jihad against Israel rather than a popular secular uprising, which is what Fatah called for. And over time, we began to see these political differences develop, and we soon saw that by the early 1990s, Fatah and Hamas were literally at odds with each other over political issues. Now, when Yasser Arafat signed the Oslo Accords, this essentially put them on a collision course. As Arafat began to work with Israel towards peace, Hamas became known for one thing, and one thing only, which was suicide bombings. Now, the way that those suicide bombings were described in our press, they began in 1994 and continued all the way up, through after the second Intifada of 2000. But the way that they were described in our media was that Hamas was trying to kill as many Jews and as many Israelis as possible. And that, I would say, is actually a very accurate depiction, but it's only half of the story. The other part of the story is that Hamas was willing to carry out brutal acts of violence to derail a peace process that was being shepherded by its primary political rival. It was doing everything that it could to undercut its political rival, to undercut the operations of Fatah. And this continues all the way through the year 2000. In 2000, Bill Clinton, Ehud Barak, Dennis Ross, the whole gang, they put in front of Yasser Arafat this peace deal to end all peace deals. They say, except this, 95% of the West Bank, 100% of the Gaza Strip, control over parts of Jerusalem, nominal number of refugees, all the things that I talked about that Bibi could do tomorrow if he had somehow taken some sort of mind-altering substance. But all those things were given on a silver platter to Arafat in 2000. Why did he not take it? A lot of people say, well, the man was simply not interested in living side by side with Israel. And that may very well be the case. I'm not here to sit here and say, well, Arafat was really a Zionist. That's not, you'll never hear me say that. But what I can tell you is that Arafat had some calculus that he was struggling with at the time.